Hi, welcome to our presentation. The title of this presentation is Natural Translanguaging Practices in Bangladeshi Medical Education. Here is an overview of the whole presentation. Translanguaging is a fairly recent concept which refers to the dynamic mixing of two or more languages. Thus, it relates to the people who know more than one language. The term has been conceptualized differently by different scholars, though all scholars unanimously view it as a fluid language practice where language boundaries are regularly crossed to achieve the communicative goals. Translanguaging refers to the practice of shuttling between languages to make meaning and deepen understanding. Translanguaging is immensely important in educational settings when students' linguistic repertoire includes more than one language. Even when a student's language of education is different from their home language, translanguaging becomes an important tool for them. Students also need to translanguage when they need to conceptualize complex academic content. This study was conducted in Bangladesh to see how and why medical students and teachers translanguage for academic purposes. It should be mentioned here that higher education, especially medical education in Bangladesh, is offered only in the medium of English because textbooks and teaching materials are not available in the native language Bangla. We adopted a qualitative approach in this study because we wanted to explore human learning experience. Accordingly, data were collected using semi-structured interviews. The collected data were inductively analyzed using thematic analysis to find out the major themes. Translanguaging has its origin in the Welsh school education, where both Welsh and English were used in education. Welsh educator Ken Williams coined the term Trashetu, which was later translated as translanguaging. In the Welsh context, there were strict language separation because one language was used for input and the other language was used for output. The idea of translanguaging is rooted in the idea of languaging. Swiss linguist Ferdinand Saussure defined language as a fixed system of the signifier and the signified, but later on sociolinguists began to see language as a verb rather than a noun. Thus the term languaging gained currency. In fact, languaging is an act of knowing and doing, also a way of becoming. This refers to the subtle way in which speakers use language to achieve their goals. Thus, translanguaging can be seen as a new way of being. Translanguaging is closely related to bilingualism. In earlier times, bilingualism was seen as a linguistic insufficiency and a source of confusion. It was also thought that two languages exist separately in human brain. Thus, a bilingual person was seen as the sum of two monolinguals. But later scholars argue that two languages get completely mixed in the bilingual brain and form a single language system from which bilinguals strategically and selectively use language features depending on their communicative needs. Translanguaging as a pedagogy can be structured or unstructured. Structured translanguaging is pre-planned and informed by theories. On the other hand, unstructured translanguaging is natural. The field of translanguaging is still growing. Empirical studies on translanguaging are still scarce. However, there are a few studies around the world to see the impact of translanguaging on learning and the learning process. Most of these studies are primarily on secondary education. These studies show that the practice of translanguaging helps students make sense of what they read and facilitates a deeper understanding of academic content. It develops both content knowledge and proficiency in both languages. In addition, this accommodation of students' home language in academic settings gives them a positive learning experience and helps them construct their bilingual identity. The field is yet to be explored in Bangladesh. No studies on translanguaging as pedagogy could be traced here. This study intended to fill this gap. Accordingly, this study aimed to see whether translanguaging practices prevail in Bangladeshi medical colleges where the medium of instruction is English and how this pedagogy shapes their learning experience. It also intended to see if fluid language practices enhanced students' subject-related English. The first research question aimed to see if translanguaging practices prevail in the medical education of Bangladesh. Data suggested that there were considerable natural translanguaging practices in Bangladeshi medical education. Both students and teachers had to resort to using bilingual resources for comprehension, though there were no planned instances of translanguaging from teachers' side. Participants reported that teachers used both Bangla and English to facilitate content comprehension. The second research question aimed to see if translanguaging practices enhance participants' content knowledge. It was found that the fluid language practice inside and outside the classroom significantly enhanced participants' learning content. All participants reported relying on Bangla to understand academic content. For this, they formed study groups in which they dynamically exploited the linguistic resources until they could clearly conceptualize concepts. Thus, knowledge was interpersonally acquired in which crossing language boundaries was not only useful but also essential. Translanguaging was also found to emancipate students, the participants, from dominance of English. Interestingly, all participants, like the teachers who used Bangla along with English to explain content, and they were identified as good teachers. For the third research question, it was found that translingual practices significantly enhance participants' subject-related English. It was evident from their responses that they became more and more comfortable with English as they gradually learned most subject-related terminologies. They also said that their reading comprehension in English significantly increased in the final years. This study found that participants were bound to use their bilingual repertoire to understand content and make sense of what they read. Their fluid language practices remove their cognitive challenges, enhance their learning process, and develop their skills in both languages. More importantly, participants' bilingual practices democratize their educational environment by removing the linguistic barrier. Findings of this study generally aligns with the broader literature in this field. This study significantly contributes to the field of translanguaging in that this is the first attempt to see how translanguaging practices enhance learning experience and shape students' learning in Bangladeshi Medical College. The study provides crucial insights into the translanguaging practices that take place in Bangladeshi medical education. It has been found that translanguaging is an inevitable way of languaging for bilingual students, especially in Bangladeshi medical education. This practice facilitates learning and helps the student construct knowledge, especially interpersonally. The practice of translanguaging has an additional advantage. It is found to democratize the educational environment by empowering students through using their own language in the educational environment. That's all from us in this presentation. Thank you for your patient hearing. Here is the reference list. It is time for questions and answers. Please let us know if you have any queries regarding this presentation.